I think the 2023 financial crisis has just gone global. That's another thing it has in common with the 2008 financial crisis. In fact, a lot of things are in common. I mean, first of all, the Federal Reserve created both of them, yet predicted none of them. And I began predicting the 2023 financial crisis in 2009. I just didn't know what year it was going to be. Now, in all honesty, back in 2009, I did not expect the second crisis to hit in 2023. There's no way that I thought we would make it this long. Of course, I couldn't predict precisely when. I mean, I'm not a god. Right? I'm not clairvoyant. I just understand basic economics, which unfortunately most people don't, including all of the members of the Federal Open Market Committee. Right? These guys are clueless. But the reason that I knew that the 2008 financial crisis was coming, and again, back in 2002, 2003, when I really first started warning about it, I didn't know it would hit in 2008 either. I just knew it was coming. But the reason I knew that was because I understood the consequences of the Federal Reserve's monetary policy mistakes. The Federal Reserve didn't know the consequences. They didn't even know they were making mistakes. And neither did anybody else. And so I warned and warned and warned, and I was a laughing stock. I got the nickname Dr. Doom. But at least I was out there. They had me on the mainstream media quite often to warn about this and then just make fun of me. But then in 2008, all these predictions that I've been making for years, they came true. And what happened was when the Federal Reserve and the government did everything wrong in 2009, in fact, they did all the wrong things I predicted they would do before the financial crisis, I knew that they had just sown the seeds of the next even greater financial crisis. And now, 15 years later, here we are. Now, another thing that the 2023 financial crisis has in common with the 2008 financial crisis is that when the 2008 financial crisis first began, nobody knew it was a financial crisis. Everybody in the mainstream media saw the early signs of the crisis, and they just dismissed it. I mean, I'm not even talking about subprime being contained, because that was 2007. I'm talking about later in 2008. We started to see the cracks early before the shit hit the fan, right? And when you got those first, clear-cut warning signs that this was a big problem, the media dismissed it. Okay, it's no big deal. It's an isolated event. The government will take care of it. Everything is fine. Buy the stock market, everything is good, right? That's what they thought in early 2008. Now, a few days or weeks later, it was, oh my God, we need a massive bailout. This is the end of the world, right? So things change very quickly. And to me, it looks like that's exactly what's happening now, right? First, it's like, oh, this Silicon Valley Bank, oh, it's just a unique event. These guys were just a bunch of morons who happen to be running this bank. Everybody else is a genius. Just these guys were the only idiots, right? Inexperienced, didn't know what they were doing. Well, if they were that stupid, why didn't anybody know about it in advance? Why didn't anybody warn that we had a bunch of morons and incompetents running the Silicon Valley Bank? Why didn't any of the regulators do something about the incompetent people that were running this bank? The reality is, they're just as competent as everybody else. I mean, everybody else is doing the same thing. I mean, maybe not everybody. I'm sure there are some sound banks out there. After all, we got a lot of banks out there. But a lot of them have done exactly what Silicon Valley Bank did, of course, including Signature Bank, which is also failed. Here is another ironic, unintended consequence of the moronic decision to cover all of the deposits, including the uninsured deposits of Signature Bank and of Silicon Valley Bank. I didn't even talk about this one on my last podcast. But, now even other people are talking about it. But here's the consequence, the irony of all this. And this is why the government shouldn't be doing it. Or one reason. There are a whole bunch of reasons why they shouldn't be doing it. But when the government bailed out these two banks, it was a special exception for these banks because they haven't actually changed the law. The law still is that it's only $250,000 that's insured. But the government said, oh, this is an emergency. These two banks, I don't know if they're systemically important or however they designated it, but it's like an emergency. And so we're going to extend this protection to these banks. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that any other banks enjoy the same protection. For now, it's just these two banks where we're going to cover all of the deposits. Now, here's the problem. Now, the government has said these two banks, these insolvent banks that were run by a bunch of morons, this is where you want to put your money. If you've got your money in any other bank, take it out and put it in this bank. That's what people are doing. Because if you have your money at another bank that does not have this protection, right? And then you have $2 million, $3 million, $5 million, why would you leave it there? Because if that bank fails, and of course it could, there's no guarantee that the government is going to decide to cover all the deposits of that bank. But we know already that if you move your money to Silicon Valley Bank or Signature Bank, the government's got you covered. So now what the government has done inadvertently is they've created a run on probably a bunch of solvent banks. Because now depositors want to withdraw their money from these better run solvent banks and deposit it into this insolvent bank that is now being run by the government. I mean, the government is probably the least competent of anybody to run a bank. But now, because nobody can lose money in this bank, no matter how stupid they are, no matter what dumb things they do with it, because the U.S. government, the Federal Reserve said, don't worry, you'll never lose a penny in this bank. Well, how can the other banks that don't have that guarantee compete? This is the moral hazard. So now you basically have the too big to fail banks, and that's like a handful of banks where hey, I can put my money at JP Morgan, I can put it at Bank of America, right? Because the government will never let those banks fail. No matter what stupid things they do with my money, no matter how much money they lose, they're never going to fail. They're just going to have an open-ended flood of money coming from the government. So I can put my money there, right? Who cares how incompetent those guys are? Now you've also got these other couple of banks where, okay, these aren't these too big to fail systemically important banks, but whatever, they've already been designated by the government. You put your money in here and you can't lose. All the other banks, thousands of banks, they're all suspect. This is the opposite of capitalism. So instead of people sending their money to the solvent banks, they're sending them to the least solvent, most insolvent banks out there. This is what the government is doing. It is screwing up an economy they've already screwed up, and this is not capitalism. This is ironic or ridiculous, and I'm not making this up, right? Jim Cramer on CNBC, and by the way, of course, Jim Cramer earlier in the year was recommending that people buy stock in Signature Bank and Silicon Valley Bank. What are the odds of that? Two of the first banks to fail were on top of his recommended list, right? You got zero, you lost 100%, right? That's the only place now where capitalism supposedly exists, is if you buy stock in a bank and the bank goes out of business, well, then you lose.